right, welcome to Old School. Cenk Uygur, Steve-O, Dave Kohler, a pretty old school crew here.
It's pretty old school.
Yeah, it's old school in two different ways. Dave and I started the company with Ben, so he's as old school as it gets. And Dave, Steve, and I all grew up together in East Brunswick, New Jersey. Okay,
East Brunswick.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously brought to you by shoptyt.com. You can get this, you can get the Batman thing. I always forget. Okay, there you go. All right, let's move on. So lots of fun topics. I've had a lot of Larry David moments over the last couple of weeks that I've been saving up for old school. So I'm coming out of a weed shop. I'm going right in. I'm diving in. Okay. Now in LA, you have to understand the weed shops have now become like grocery stores, and so if you the country is so bifurcated on this issue that if you live in a place where it has not been legalized yet, like if you came to LA and you went into a place where you buy marijuana, you'd be like what is this? Is crazy. There's like people of all different ages, and there's a little old lady buying weed. It looks like pretty much like Trader Joe's, right? And so, or Whole Foods or something, and no, like. My point is a really funny one, which is everyone is calm. Like we've moved, like, and so what do I mean by calm? Nobody's like has furtive looks anymore, right? As they're entering the store, if they're in this, like, oh, am I gonna get caught? Am I gonna get caught? Right? Like Times Square in the 1980s with porn shops. I didn't say anything. What? I just hear that about, a friend told me about it. Anyway, by the way, if you ever don't want to give away that you're doing something wrong, don't do this look. Okay, the minute you do that, everyone knows you're about to do something wrong. Anyway, but the story's not about that. It's when I come out and a guy wants to take a picture. He sees me in the parking lot and he's like, hey, Cenk, and he says Cenk. Not Young Turks, not that dude on YouTube, not Cenk, not Cenk, not Jenks. Okay, so he gets the name right, Cenk, but he's got crazy eyes, and like I could tell, I think 9 out of 10 times when someone's on my side, not on my side. A lot of people who are not on my side want to take pictures anyway. God bless. I don't care, right? And they'll usually say at some point, and they'll be like, I don't agree with everything you say, or they'll flat out say, I don't agree with anything you say. Come on, let's take a picture, right? Great, no problem at all. Okay, that's much better than the guy at the airport who was walking by. You guys remember this? I see him. He's got crazy eyes. He's headed towards me. This is about a year and a half ago or something, and he's like, and he's twitching like, oh, and I know what he's thinking. I swear to God. All on facial expressions. He's thinking, what am I gonna say? What am I gonna say? I hate this guy. What am I gonna say? And he's coming at me like this, and then he can't make up his mind. And right as he's about to pass me, he goes, you!
Didn't hear this story. No, I never heard this story before.
Yeah. And like in front of everybody at the airport, and everyone's like, what on God's green earth, right? And I'm laughing, and he just walks by. He's like,
he figured it out what to say, all right.
Yeah, that's right. So in New York, it happens a lot because it's so crowded. So right. you get recognized more because there's just so many more people. And since it's in New York, they also feel like they can say anything. So I think I've even heard like, hey, Uygur, suck it. Like it's such a, like Uygur, Jesus, man, you really gotta know this show to know Uygur.
All right, so you have a lot of fan interaction. I have very little, but actually 100% of my interactions have been positive. I've never had TYT haters say anything to me. But just this past weekend, I did a little mini guys trip up to Seattle with my law school friends, and I was recognized 3 times, but they're all like very nice. One guy was like, Steve-O, you rock. And my friends are just blown away by this, right? They're like, what is happening? But I'm curious, like, the people who love you, of course, I've seen all iterations of that. But people who hate you or hate the Young Turks, other than just like a walk by, outburst, have you had any like interesting interactions? I mean, where they say, I hate you because X, Y, and Z? Was there any kind of discourse?
Yeah. No, and then there was actually this story I'm about to tell in front of the weed shop is probably the longest interaction. And maybe the most interesting. but it's gonna take a turn. Okay, so, but no, like it's usually shouting. Like again, another place where it was crowded. It was in New Orleans during Mardi Gras, right up to the lead up of Mardi Gras, because I was there for a Money Out of Politics conference, and some guy that's one of my favorite of all time too, when he's like, Ben Shapiro ate your ass. It's like,
does that help Ben Shapiro?
Yeah, that is. I don't think you quite meant it that way. But okay, if that's something that gets you interested. Anyway,
a Freudian slip there.
Yeah. So and sometimes somebody, like I'll be at a a fast food place or whatever, so we'll have in line, so we'll have a little bit longer to talk, and somebody will say, look, I really disagree with a lot of what you say on X, Y, or Z, but it really hasn't gone that in depth. So this guy in front of the pot shop, he's like, hey Cenk, that's you, right? And I said, yeah, and he's like, his eyes are twitching a little bit, and I'm like, uh-oh.
Wait, is it twitching because he's high, because he's like super excited, he's a weird dude? Like, what's going on?
Nah, he's got crazy eyes. He's a little weird.
Well,
okay.
There's people who are oppose you, and then there's people who want to cause trouble. Are you worried that he wants to cause trouble?
So I don't know what he's up to so far, and all I have is a hunch, because he knows my name, that 95 out of 100 times means he's a fan, a viewer who likes this show, right? Because the haters, they're less likely to know that it's pronounced Cenk, etc. Right? So anyway, he says, hey, were you just buying weed? And I was like, yeah, that's why I'm in front of the weed shop. But anyway, he said it in like kind of like a, like I kind of caught you kind of tone of voice, and I was like,
I'm buying for my friend.
Yeah, I don't have to tell him I'm buying. Guess who I bought for? Me. Okay,
I'm my friend.
Yeah, every time I think of Jimmy Dore's line. So Jimmy, back when we had medical cannabis in LA, but not recreational.
Yeah.
He said people come up to Jimmy and say, "Well, aren't you worried about getting on, doing the medical cannabis, because then you are on a list?" He's like, "Yeah, a list of people who could buy weed." And so I literally thought of that line as the guy's asking me. And then he says, you want to take a picture? Okay, good, no problem so far. Okay, I got two hunches, the eyes and the like kind of caught you way of phrasing where you're buying weed. But he goes take out a phone, and the phone is like super old school. It's from like the original iPhone or something, right? And I'm like, I don't know why I thought that was a hunch. It doesn't mean anything, right? But I was like, yeah, hunch number 3.
Yeah, 3 red flags.
Yeah. Like, look, guys, again, it's totally unfair. You can just have an old phone, right? But I don't know. Anyway, so then finally he gets to it. He's like, so Cenk, what do you think of Sandy Hook? And I was like, oh, here we go. Okay. I was like, what is there to think? Right? Right. He's like, come on, what do you think? And I was like, I think a lot of kids got killed and it was terrible. And he's like, how do you know? I'm like, okay, I'm like, dude, I gotta go.
I gotta be careful not to get sued.
Yeah, he better be careful, that's right. Like, how do you, I can't have that conversation.
You can't.
Right? Because what are you supposed to say? How are you supposed to disprove that they weren't crisis actors and that it didn't happen? I mean, then what a preposterous conversation to have, right? But that's the thing about conspiracy theories, is that that's part of why they're so self-reinforcing, because people don't want to have that conversation. Because what do you want me to say? The kids died. Stop it. Leave them alone, right? And they're like, oh, but how do you know? Where's your evidence? Like, dude, I'm not walking around with evidence of like dead kids in my back pocket. The evidence it was all over TV. It was on every newspaper. Every single reporter in the country that went and took pictures of the dead bodies, okay, et cetera, right? But you don't want to get into that conversation, so you leave, and then they think, see?
Got him.
He didn't have any proof. Aha!
Yeah,
right?
So that's the problem, right? Look, in society in general, there's an issue of mental illness. Certain percentage of people are just crazy. They're crazy, right? And it manifests in different ways. Sometimes they're functional crazy people. They're like, just like me and you, they work in a regular job, but they believe in absurd, crazy things, or they have weird, crazy, dangerous desires, whatever it may be, right? But now a lot of these crazies can find their little groups online and validate each other's crazy, and think that they're not crazy at all. The other people who don't share the belief that they're the crazy ones.
100%.
So it's nuts.
So what? The online world did not create crazy people, of course.
We just found each other, and they're like, "Great, I'm not the crazy one."
100%. What it did is it allowed them to have a community.
Yes.
And that community is also self-reinforcing. So Dave, I don't know if you remember, but one of the Turkish moms from when we were growing up thought that OJ was definitely innocent. Okay, she was convinced that it was a conspiracy against OJ. Right now, the jury also thought that, so I guess it wasn't as crazy, right? But
they found him not guilty, not that he's innocent.
That's right.
All right.
Right.
Anyway.
And so we were all outraged by it at the time. I'm outraged by it at the time. I now understand it way better, the skepticism that jury had on a macro sense, even if inappropriate for that particular case. But she didn't know any of that. She didn't know anything about the African American community or anything like that. She's a little old Turkish mom, but she was convinced, no, it's definitely a conspiracy. And so they always existed. But today, she would find a little community.
Yes.
Online, and they would encourage each other.
Yeah. So before the internet, if you had weird, crazy thoughts, maybe you kept that your whole life, or you're disabused of those thoughts by other people who are like, "What? No." And then you're like, wait a second, and then you start to maybe adopt the views of your community, which in that instance isn't an online community, it's an actual community, a physical community of your neighbors, friends, whatever it may be. So you're less likely to hold on to it. But now it's the opposite, where you find this community and they reinforce it, and it gets worse and worse. Now to the OJ thing, it's a little tangent on OJ.
And I'll come back. There's actually a little bit of an ending to the Sandy Hook.
So my daughter, who's 13, says, "Dad, have you ever heard of this guy named OJ Simpson?" It's like, yeah.
I'm lost track of your daughters. That's now the youngest sister.
The youngest one.
Wow.
So she goes, "Dad, he is so bad." I was like, yeah, he is. Right. Because she started watching the OJ Simpson documentary with my oldest daughter, and they were just riveted. So I started watching.
Like an actual documentary, or the People versus OJ Simpson?
The People versus OJ Simpson
on FX.
On FX. That's the one with John Travolta.
Yes, that's not really a documentary.
Right, but docudrama, right? So I started watching it with them, and I hadn't watched any of the OJ Simpson documentaries. Now, I remember of course, OJ Simpson happened when we were, in law school.
Yeah.
It was like a big freaking deal, so we're on top of all the day-to-day news, but I had forgotten a lot of it, and maybe I wasn't following the case as closely as I thought I was, but it was incredible watching this docudrama. And now I totally get why the jury found him not guilty. I don't even think it's unreasonable for them to think that way. In fact, it's totally reasonable. So they have Mark Furman, who was just the most hideous racist. It's unbelievable. It's actually jarring to hear the words that he's using. And we have different sensibility today than we had back then. But just the N-word over and over. And they're reading from a transcript some police report, something that he had written, where he talks about, this place stinks of, dead N-words, and sometimes we beat the shit out of them, we bloody them up, and all we have to do is just wash our hands because our dark police uniforms, you can't see the blood, but we just beat the crap out of them until we get a confession. That's how police work is done. So like that kind of testimony is read in, and then when he's in front of the jury, he's stonewalling because he doesn't want the defense to get into all of his all the bad things he's done. So to every question, his response is, I choose to plead the fifth, right? Mm-hmm. And the prosecution is getting kind of antsy and they're getting annoyed. And they're saying, "Come on, okay, he's not going to answer. So let's just move on. Let's just get him off the thing." And then Johnny Cochran says, "Hold on, just one more question. Did you frame the defendant in this case?" He didn't say it. It was anyway. He's like, I plead the fifth.
Oh,
Boom, right?
Reasonable doubt.
So reasonable doubt right there. And the reason why, even if he didn't frame him, the reason why he doesn't want to say it is that if he puts that into an issue, like does he frame people? Well, that opens a door to all the past times that he did frame people, which he clearly did, right?
Yeah.
So that's why the jury's like, okay, that's not guilty. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, well, I'll say one thing about that, and then two things about the fallout. Now knowing, and this is part of my overall education. Back, remember '91, I'm still a Republican, right?
Yeah.
And we were mainly outraged. I think you and I were watching it together at my apartment in New York. I think because they superseded the Knicks game, playoff game.
That's
Bronco
the day
chase?
of the chase.
The Bronco chase. Yeah,
we were watching that together.
Yeah, was it? I think it was the championship. Yeah, right.
It wasn't the championship. It was a Eastern Conference Finals. Bulls Knicks.
Yeah, that's even worse. Bulls Knicks.
That was a real championship.
Yeah.
Hey, was it Rockets Knicks?
Rockets Knicks finals.
Oh,
No, I think
you're
right. I think it was.
See, Craig is always right. This
Craig's
guy,
always right.
He's always
Hashtag
right.
Craig's always right. No, seriously, I did not at that time understand to what degree the African American community in this country had been beaten down by the police.
Yeah.
Systemically, for literally hundreds of years.
Basically, every black person living in South LA knew someone personally, if not himself or herself, that was harassed or beaten or somehow treated badly by the police.
Yeah,
so for them to believe that, and Mark Furman has said that he hates seeing black dudes with white women, and if he ever saw one in a car together, he'd just pull them over for no reason and give him a ticket, right?
Yeah, so back then as a non-black kid who had grown up in an upper middle class suburb,
basically white privilege. Right?
Yeah, I had no idea that the cops were the bad guys, and so they're not all bad guys now, but as we've seen, a lot of them are.
Yeah,
maybe they're not bad guys to you if you're white or more importantly or equally importantly rich, right? But as you know, Johnny Cochran experienced, and you see it in that docudrama, being rich didn't help him either.
That's right.
And he'd get pulled over in Westwood, he'd get pulled over in Beverly Hills, even though he was a very successful and wealthy attorney, et cetera. So anyway, and my education through all those years is, oh my God, it's way million times worse than I realized. And hence, then empathizing with that jury, wait a minute, they didn't have my perspective at all. They had their perspective, which is what Steve said.
Yeah.
Every one of them knew someone who had been beaten up by the cops or framed by the cops, et cetera. Within their context, a black man being set up by the cops is like literally the most normal thing they could imagine.
That's the default.
Yeah, that's right. And so now in that case, it was more unlikely ironically, because of how famous OJ was.
Yes.
That makes it far less likely that they would have the chutzpah to try to frame a guy with that level of power, wealth, and fame.
Or you can flip the other way, and the narrative could be, well, they just didn't want a black man to be that powerful, that famous, and have that much access to white
but
women.
what do they do?
Therefore, we must take him down, right?
Yeah. Then so they killed Nicole Simpson, right? Yeah, so it's unlikely to say the least. And OJ's a really bad guy.
He is, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, now the two interesting fallouts is, first of all, Steve-O's a cop, okay, like Kamala Harris. So be careful, he's infiltrating.
That's right.
Because you
put a lot of bad people away.
Because you were a prosecutor in LA.
I was a prosecutor for 10 months.
Oh,
sure. I think 2 of those months I was in training, and then I was for like
Did you work on the OJ case?
I did not, but I was in the prosecutor's office in 1999, and that was on the heels of the OJ case, and every single thing that we did was impacted by the OJ Simpson trial, like everything. Like, I mean,
How so?
That loss was just a bone-crushing loss for the DA's office. Gil Garcetti, who hired me, he's the father of Eric Garcetti, the current mayor. I mean, he was voted out. He lost to Steve Cooley because of that. So one of the main things was, apparently OJ Simpson had beaten Nicole multiple times before he allegedly killed her. We'll say that. And the cops are called out there multiple times, and they just said, "Oh, it's OJ. He's a nice guy. He's got a nice smile. He's in those Naked Gun movies. He's not a bad guy. Just let it go. Let it go." So they let this domestic violence issue just kind of swept under the rug. After O.J. Simpson, the DA's office had pretty much a zero tolerance policy. Like, it's better for us to just try the matter, even if we're gonna lose the trial. And then, because we don't want, the last thing the DA's office wants is for the DA to be soft on a guy who beats his wife, and then later that guy kills his wife, right? So if we do a trial and we lose, well, it's a stupid jury's fault. It's not our, we did the best we could, right? But if we don't even try him, then it's our fault for not bringing him to justice earlier to prevent that matter. So we had so many domestic violence cases to try them. And look, I mean, as you know, whenever you have a zero tolerance policy towards anything, it leads to stupid and perverse results. So we had those issues.
Yeah, so the pendulum always swings too far in the other direction. You got the prosecutor's office in LA should have prosecuted way more domestic violence cases,
but not
earlier,
every single one of them.
But not, yeah, exactly. So, Dave, before I continue with Steve being a cop, so you were a liberal all the way back then. This is one of your favorite topics, back when I was a Republican. So, what was your impression of the OJ trial?
Well, I did read about it, and I understood and learned about the feelings of the black community. So I wasn't that surprised or outraged at the jury verdict. And I also understood it's a jury verdict. It's not truth. We all know what the truth is. Definitely killed it, which makes the case maybe more interesting, because is the jury supposed to get the truth, or is it supposed to play a role in society?
Yeah, and that really kind of goes to the old adage, one of the best quotes ever, I think it's from Martin Luther King, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So you have all this injustices with cops behaving badly, and then you have OJ behaving badly, and OJ is a beneficiary of the bad behavior of the cops, right?
But you know what? So I don't want the Goldmans to take this the wrong way. And now OJ's attorney's apparently harassing one of the Goldmans. Like, dude, let it go. Jesus Christ, right? But an interesting argument could be made that what the jury did that day is partly how the system's supposed to work, where it's a jury nullification in a sense, where they go, oh, we know what happened, but we're gonna vote not guilty to send a message.
I don't think that's what happened, but yes.
Yeah, look, I don't think so either. I think they genuinely thought that they had reasonable doubt, right? But the reason we have juries and not judges is because sometimes the citizens are supposed to rise up and go, enough, no, we just say no.
Yeah.
And so in a sense, they did that whether they intended it or not, and they certainly didn't intend to have national and international ramifications. But that's partly how it's supposed to work too. A jury of your peers going, no, and not buying what the government's selling.
And again, and I would argue that this is further injustice to the Goldmans, right?
Yes, of course.
So there's injustice all around.
Yeah. But what it did do was it did send a shockwave that was both counterproductive and productive. Counterproductive because white people did not react well, right? They were like, what the f, right?
It was an amazing response. I'll never forget. So this verdict came down, I believe, in September of '95. Okay, I just started my job, my first real job at a law firm in New York City. And word got out that the verdict was coming down. So everyone went into the conference room and the TV was on. And when the verdict was read, I've never seen such a disparate reaction by different races. So almost all the attorneys were white. And most of the staff, like the copy room people and secretaries and a few others, most of them were people of color. And one side of the room completely cheered. The other side of the room was just disgusted, right?
Yeah.
And I was just looking at the two sides. I was like, oh my God.
And here's an Asian man caught in the middle.
Right.
So, but the second thing that happened, in a sense, and this was more drawn out, it wasn't immediate, but it did, begin a very long conversation about, wait a minute, are we living in two different worlds here, right?
Yeah.
Because white people couldn't believe what black people believed about cops.
There's two totally different realities, right?
Right. And so on that day and for a long time, it's not like that immediately settled in. They were like, wait a minute, I think black people might have a point. right? Like maybe the cops are unfair to them.
And look,
but over the long run, it at least began that conversation, which is now still not concluded in 2019. But we're getting closer and closer.
Yeah, so I don't even blame the white people for having that reaction, because in their reality, cops are super helpful. They prevent crime. If your car breaks down, they help you. If you're lost, they'll tell you which way to go. In East Brunswick, the way we grew up, cops are great. I grew up with a very positive set of interactions with cops. Even to this day, I have positive ones. I was pulled over for going 85 miles an hour in a 65-mile-an-hour zone in Arizona on my recent vacation. Next thing I know, I'm chatting with the cop. We're shaking hands and we're laughing, and I don't get a ticket. And my kids are outraged, actually. They're like, you should have gotten a ticket. I don't know why I didn't get a ticket.
Your kids are a little too square.
No, they're such rule followers. They love rules. They like to follow the rules. Yeah.
Yeah, it's no wonder they're progressive. It sounds like a centrist Democrat waiting to happen.
but you know what? So for every OJ, we have the Central Park Five, right?
Yep.
I would argue many more Central Park
Many
Fives.
more. Yeah. Many more.
So I just started watching that documentary, and it's gut wrenching because growing up in East Brunswick in the shadows of New York, when that case went down, that was on every single newspaper for months, every single newscast. And, looking back, I feel awful because I was part of the problem. I totally bought the narrative uncritically that there are packs of black kids running around the city, murdering and raping white people, and it's super dangerous, right? This whole notion of wilding and super predators, it was basically the worst of every racial trope you can imagine. And all of us just accepted it. I mean, we never questioned it. We're like, yeah, of course these five guys did it.
Yeah, right? And so I totally agree with you that you were wrong.
On the Central Park Five, I also was wrong in a rare case in those.
Oh, well,
I didn't make any deeper inquiry into. I also accepted.
Yeah, so actually I was gonna get back to you, Dave, on your view of cops, because you're generally a white kid growing up in a nice suburb. Back then you were even blonde. But you're a huge liberal, or however you want to describe it, right? So what was your view of cops?
Liberal, are you?
A classic.
No,
I read John Stuart Mill before I go to bed every night, whatever that means.
Well, the dial of ideas just got turned to hot. Okay, anyway, so what was your view of cops back then growing up?
Yeah, a nuanced, mixed view. They're generally good for society, but they abuse power all the time. With racial disparities, racial issues.
So you knew that in high school?
Yeah, not from my own experience though, from reading about what's going on in the world.
Reading, I knew I was doing something wrong when I was a kid, and I wasn't reading.
And there's a police element to the O.J. Simpson and to the LAPD that has less to do with race. Just the police department in LA was just not properly functioning forever, for its entire existence, and it continued beyond the O.J. case with that giant Rampart scandal where they were planting evidence. Finally, now it's a more reformed, reasonable police department.
Actually, so they were so there's two different problems, but probably very interrelated in the LA police. One is that they were basically a criminal enterprise for a long time. They were the largest gang in LA. And so for time immemorial, LA's cops were crooked. And so they'd beat up the criminals and take their territory and take their stuff, etc. But they also had brought in cops from Alabama and the South. And so they were deeply racist when they got here. And they settled in Orange County as part of the reason why Orange County was Republican back in the day, and Simi Valley, etc. And that's where Mark Furman's from. And so you had this basically foreign occupation force in LA from the deep South who is both racist and criminal.
There are also other structural problems. So, and one of the reasons why I was one of the people that were less aghast at the OJ verdict was because I lived in LA at the time. And when I first came to LA, it was '92 in August. In April of '92, it was the LA riots. And one of the classes I took in law school was a class called Police Reform. And there's this big commission, the Christopher Commission by our former Secretary of State Warren Christopher, that really delved into how bad LA policing was. And one of the problems is that because LA is a large metropolitan area with a lot of square miles to patrol, there wasn't a lot of community policing. They were just in their cars doing drive-by policing. And it was basically shoot first, ask questions later. And even the incentive structures within the police force were so screwed up. So, for example, if you were hit with police violence, unreasonable force, whatever, that was punished with like 3 days of paid leave or something like that, right? But if you smashed your patrol car, that was like a week of unpaid leave or something like that. So basically, police brutality issues were not a big deal. Other things were a much bigger deal. And the way that settlements were paid out, there was a big giant fund to settle police brutality cases. And at the end of the year, if you didn't deplete that fund just goes back to the general city fund. Like there's no incentive to not deplete it. So you're like, okay, we have this huge fund to cover me. I don't get fired. I don't get in trouble. So I'm gonna just, kick people's ass, ask questions later. Whatever I do, I keep myself safe and do the least amount that I have to do to be out there policing. Everything was set up wrong, and it allowed, especially with the racial dynamics, economic dynamics, to really kind of brutalize the civilian population. But even if they weren't racist, if it was just black guys policing black guys, it would have similar problems. Probably not as bad, but similar problems because the incentive structures were so screwed up.
Okay, so the old school is now in 3 parts. I think a lot of you are familiar with it already. But first part's on YouTube. It's just half an hour. Second full hour is on podcast. YouTube guys, we got to let you go. We do have a lot of great things to talk about, including the worst part of Mark Furman, the biggest scandal about it. And how local news brainwashed us all to be racist in a sense. And I still got to finish the story about Crazy Eyes dude, etc. But podcast guys, you're gonna hear all that. So if you're watching on YouTube, get the free podcast. Hopefully give it 5 stars if you like it, etc. And if you want to watch the whole 90-minute old school or listen to it anytime you want, tyt.com/join to become a member. It helps the show. It helps the progressive movement if you're so inclined. Plus, you get all of our shows like this one. All right, thanks for watching this free clip of Old School. Don't forget to become a TYT member today for the rest of the show and for more exclusive content throughout the network. Join now at tyt.com/join.
We found television's best kept secret, a public access.